Alright guys, today I'm going to be doing a little overview of my record holding stock bottom end 4.8 liter. I would really appreciate it if you guys subscribe if you like this. I get questions about this all the time, so that's why I am making this video. Anyways, we'll get right into it. Right up front you can see it has a Summit 25% underdrive truck balancer. It also had a truck water pump and a LS Simple bracket with the stock truck alternator. I never had any belt issues. It worked great. I didn't obviously run power steering or anything like that since it was in my Fox Body race car. The engine itself is a 2005 LR4. It came out of a Tahoe. It has the factory 706 heads and they are unported. It also has the stock rockers original from the motor, and the entire bottom end is stock. The only thing done to the bottom end is the reluctor wheel is tacked onto the crank, and I never actually checked the bearings or the rings or anything like that, so I do not know the ring gap, although it did have 140,000 miles, so obviously they were opened up some with that that amount of wear, but I'm not sure why they are. However, it has seen 41 pounds of boost, so obviously they're gapped enough. But another thing done to the bottom of the engine, of course, is the Holley 302-1 oil pan, and it also has a Melling 10296 oil pump, which you will often hear that the high volume, high pressure pumps will drain the pan and cause issues. In order to combat that, and also to combat hard 60-foots draining the pan or pulling all the oil away from the pickup, I did run 1 or 2 quarts over what they recommended into the pan in order to help with that issue. I also have a Iwis timing chain. It has a Little John Motorsports Solutions cam, custom cam. It is now released specs though, 227, 233, 601, 606 lift on a 111+5. It also has Johnson ST2116 LSR lifters. It has 3/8 inch push rods that are standard wall. It has the stock rockers, of course, as I mentioned, with the Smith Brothers trunnion kit. And originally I had a 660 BTR spring kit. However, I did end up running into some valve flow around 77 to 7800 RPM. That spring kit was actually used off of another car, so it is possible that those were a little bit weaker than new. But I ended up going to the Ultimate RPM spring kit, which has the 685 springs and the titanium retainers and all of that fancy stuff, and that's worked great for me. I think that just about covers the engine, other than actually there is the ARP head studs as well. They are just a Pro Series head studs, and it has a chromatic head gasket. And next up is the transmission mounted to the engine. Right now I don't have the converter in it, but it has a PTC 180 first gear glide. It is a 10 clutch reed case glide. It's worked great for me. It's definitely a little bit overkill for most stock bottom end cars, but I believe the power range that you want to upgrade to an aftermarket case is right around 1,000 to 1,200 horsepower, and according to the mile per hour and weight of my Fox Body, I was making just under 1,300 horsepower, so I was right on that line kind of. And I also plan to go to bigger motors later on, so I wanted to make sure that I had a plenty strong enough transmission. I also had originally I had a PTC 95/18.0 converter, and I ran that all the way until I set the record the first time, where I ran the 791 at 170. After that I ended up changing to a 20-2 stator in the PTC 95 converter to loosen it up a little bit. It's having a little bit too much of an RPM drop. Of course, part of keeping these stock bottom end motors alive is keeping the RPM up and keeping away from the mid-range where you make all the torque. Torque follows right along with cylinder pressure, and cylinder pressure is what is going to kill this. So if you can make the same amount of torque at 1,000 RPM higher, you're going to make quite a bit more power. So the goal for me pretty much is to balance between killing it with too much torque and too much RPM, and I would much rather kill with RPM than torque personally. So the engine has seen 8650, although with this fairly conservative camshaft it didn't quite make the power there, but it did make great power all the way up until right around 8,000 and just over that. I had this engine originally in my Fox body, which is now sold, so I can't quite show you guys that car, but I can show plenty of pictures and videos, and there's some old ones on my channel as well. The car was a 25.5 mild steel chassis. It weighed 2950 with me in it on the line. It had air to water intercooler. It was just your typical 2000 horsepower air to water. It was it wasn't a name brand or anything. I just got it off of a friend pretty cheap. I had an ice tank in the back of the car where I actually had the trans cooler mounted as well, and that works great. I never really had any temp issues with the transmission. Also, one thing that I kind of skipped over was the intake and the exhaust on the car. So the intake was actually a Edelbrock ProFlow, and I actually had it turned around backwards because I had the intercooler in the car. So I had the intake facing back here, and the intercooler just came right out and right into the intake. And also the headers that I had on it, I also sold with the car. I sold the whole turbo kit with the car. It had just your typical eBay headers, the $130 ones or whatever. They're the 1 3/4 inch primaries, and it necked down to a 3-inch collector, but I ended up actually cutting that collector and necking it down to 2.5 inch in order to keep the velocity up to help spool the turbos. And the turbos that it did have were cast S366s, which with 68 millimeter turbine, 0.88 AR. Nothing fancy there, of course. And also I had tile 44 millimeter wastegates and a tile 50 millimeter blow off valve. I think that pretty much covers all of that. The plugs I ran, in case you're curious, I originally started with a BR7EF, and I had it gapped pretty tight around 18, 0.018, and then on the latest record pass I actually had a B8EFS in it, and I had them gapped down a little bit tighter around 15, 16. The car originally ran on pump E85. I ran it on that all the way until I maxed out the 3 450s that I had in my fuel cell, Walbro 450s, and the injectors were Bosch 210s. It was a great combo. I thought I was doing it overkill, but it turns out the engine made it a lot farther than I originally planned it to. I figured that I was going to be able to kill it with that much fuel and that much air from the S366s, but as you can see, it's still sitting here and it doesn't have any holes in it, and it seems to be fine after beating on it for a long time and seeing a peak of 40 pounds of boost. So on the first record pass, where I went to 791 at 170, which at 1,000 subscribers, I'm actually going to show you the data log from that, so you'll be able to see exactly what I'm talking about. But I started to lose fuel pressure because of the 3 450s weren't quite keeping up on the pump E85. So after that, I ended up mixing in some C16. I did about 50-50 pump E85 and C16, and that worked great. That helped me stretch the pumps farther, from 35 pounds of boost to just over 40 pounds of boost in order to reset my record. Another change that I made in between those times was I went from a 373 rear gear to a 410 rear gear, and the car was a pretty simple setup. It had Wild Rides torque boxes. It had a stock 8.8 that was braced. It originally had 31 spline strange axles and 373 gear, and then of course after I set the record the first time, I ended up changing and upgrading to 35 spline axles and a 410 gear, of course. I never ended up breaking the 31 spline though, surprisingly enough, even going on 118 60 foot. So I was pretty impressed with those. But the car also had a strange double adjustable rear coilovers and a single adjustable strange in the front. I also had chain limiters in the front, and they were limited to right around 2 inches of travel, and I had the front struts full tight in order to try and keep the front end down. They were I was kind of at the limit of the struts really, but I did manage a 115 60 foot on the record pass, the latest record pass, where I went 495 at 140, and I will post that slip here so you can see that. And also the engine was originally controlled with a stock P01 ECU. I ran that for quite a while, and then I ended up reaching the 3-bar limit, so I went ahead and upgraded to a Holley Dominator where I could put a 5-bar map sensor in it and really get after it. And I did the Holly Dominator right before I set the first record, and I ran it all the way until I pulled the motor out, and the motor was pulled out in working order. I drove the car back in the trailer after my 780 pass, and then I brought it home and pulled the engine out and sold the car, and I actually picked up my new car, which is a little bit better a chassis, and I plan to go quite a bit faster with this. And anyways, if you guys want to see the progress on that car and what I'm going to be changing to the motor, putting it in there, then stay tuned to the channel. Go ahead and subscribe and check out my other videos. Anyways, hopefully this helped you out a little bit. Hopefully it answered some of your questions. However, if I did miss any, go ahead and leave them in the comments, and I'll get to them as soon as I can. I appreciate you guys for watching, and of course I will see you guys in the next one.